Hi chickens, I promised you guys that I would make some more videos about chaos magic and that I would become more vocal to that end. So this is going to be kind of the instalment that would have organically led on from the video that I did about magical models and possibilities. I am going to change my playlists up slightly. Some of you guys may have noticed that I'm not updating my playlists as much with the new videos that I'm making, and that is because my playlists need a major overhaul, I think. As I talk more about witchcraft and principles of chaos magic and different stuff like that, I want to talk about servitors and magical thought forms. I want to talk about sigil magic. I want to talk. If that's something that you haven't established about me so far, then I definitely don't think you've been here long. I want to talk. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pull apart the key playlist that I have, which is, I think it's called Spirituality and Personal Development, which is way too generic and vague. And I'm going to basically take all of the stuff that I've done about witchcraft and magic so far, about my own journey and about different principles and stuff, and I'm going to place it into one much more useful playlist. So look out for that, because that is coming. So I'm going to lead on from the discourse that I gave to you guys about magical models and possibilities, and I'm going to talk about the 6 key principles of chaos magic. As I've explained before in a couple of videos now, chaos magic is not an overarching magical structure. You won't find any literature to help you to discern how to set up an altar if you are a chaos witch or chaos magician. You will not find literature to explain to you how to do a spell or what kind of deities you should petition. None of that stuff, because it basically doesn't provide an intricate framework. It doesn't tell you what to do. It's an approach to magic and ritual which you can adopt in accordance with whatever you're doing and whatever you want to do. So it's a way of looking at things. And if you were to tap 2 chaots on the shoulder at any one time in their practice and say, what are you doing in your practice? What kind of stuff are you involved with? It's very, very rare that any 2 chaots would say the same thing. We're all on very much our own individual journeys, but it's really the approach that we take to magic and ritual which makes us stick together. Chaos magic was invented in the 1970s by 2 guys called Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin, and I thank God and Goddess for those 2 guys every day. And the forerunners, or one of the key forerunners for chaos magic, was Austin Osman Spare. Again, I've talked about him in a couple of former videos, and the fact that he was the inventor of sigil magic, which I'll go into in a future video. And they actually took a lot of ideas from him. They very much enjoyed his kind of practical approach to sorcery, finding out what works, and kind of sleight of hand tricks that could be done very easily but could go to some very interesting and pragmatic places. So he was definitely a forerunner, and I think it's only fair that I make a video about kind of the prehistory of chaos magic, but I'll do that at another time and only if you guys are interested in learning that stuff. So basically it was invented in the 1970s by these 2 guys who kind of put their occultic heads together, and I think really chaos magic was born out of a lot of changes that were going on in the culture and in society at that time in England. Punk music was very big. I know Phil Hine actually referenced punk music as being something that was going on around the time that chaos magic had its inception in a house in Yorkshire. In 1978, I think it may have been, and that's actually a very good point. Punk music and everything that it represented and the kind of dialogue that was going on at the time that led into the acceptance of punk in the mainstream and that kind of stuff, I think that definitely contributed to this desire to birth something out of the occultic primordial soup, if you like, that was actually other to what one would call the big 3 at that time. And the big 3 at that time were Thelema, Kabbalistic theory, and Wicca, / other popularised forms of structured witchcraft. So the big 3 were kind of dominating, and within the big 3 you have kind of quite a lot of information that is given freely and is kind of accessible and egalitarian, but you also have a lot of information which is hierarchical in nature, which is secretive, which involves kind of orders and secret societies and kind of, you know, like little kind of elusive keys to certain doors that kind of had a very authoritarian feel, and maybe didn't feel accessible, and maybe didn't feel like they had that much to do with what was going on in the fabric of society at that time. You also need to think about what was going on in mathematics and science at the time that chaos magic had its inception. Quantum theory was very big, and discussions about quantum theory versus the theory of relativity, probabilistic waveforms and that kind of stuff, and then later on non-linear dynamics. These kinds of discussions were going on, and a lot of stuff was being discussed in science which was actually kind of advocating and validating some of the ideas that shamans and magical practitioners had had for a really long time. Lots of different kinds of dialogues were being struck up, and I think this may have been another very big reason why chaos magic kind of came to the fore at the time that it did. But other than that very garbled history lesson, I really, with this video, wanted to take you through the 6 key principles of chaos magic. These principles are principles that were kind of put together to explain how the framework, not the framework, I shouldn't say that because it's not really a framework, how the approach actually plays out when you apply it to magic and ritual practice. And I want to start by saying that even if you don't want to even remotely consider the possibility of identifying as a chaos witch or getting further into this stuff, even if it's just a case of being curious, I think that the 6 key principles of chaos magic can be incredibly nurturing and useful for a great many people when actually reassessing or exploring how their magical practice is going, how they actually relate to the idea of being a witch, and where they want their practice to go from here on in, you know, the further reaches that they wish to explore. So I think as I'm talking through the 6 key principles, which will explain the approach to you, very simplified, but these 6 key principles are kind of key to understanding it. I would suggest that whether you're a Wiccan, whether you're a Satanist, whether you're just curious, whether you're a, you know, whatever kind of paradigm you're currently running in, I would advise that you kind of absorb these 6 key principles for yourself and see if they could be helpful to you in your practice. The first principle is the avoidance of dogma. This is very important in chaos practice. The idea that one idea should be prized over all the others, that there's one overarching truth that kind of disqualifies all the others, that kind of thing is anathema to what it means to be involved in chaos magic. As I've explained before in my magical magical models and possibilities video, chaos magic is really about finding and honouring what works, and you can't do that if you're being dogmatic. Dogma and kind of the insistence upon one right way, or in fact the egoic insistence on the fact that you are always right no matter what way you're choosing, kind of cancels out the ability to do 2 things. It cancels out the ability to try new things, which is really important, because if you want to find what works, you need to be experimental and you need to be able to select from a number of different things. But it also stops you from actually breaking down the ego and recognizing that sometimes you'll do stuff that flops and sometimes you'll do stuff that works, and that's actually okay. We spend a great chunk of our lives, some of us, a lot of the time in various aspects and areas of our lives, being very concerned with being right, because the ego can be fragile and the ego enjoys the feeling of being correct and righteous. And actually what's very important in magic and ritual that we often miss is that it's actually very illuminating sometimes to be wrong, or to take a wrong turn, or to find yourself halfway down some tangled avenue that you didn't expect to go down. So I think really the avoidance of dogmatism can also be about magical exploration and ritual exploration, and not worrying too much about the perfect outcome, but actually concerning yourself more with being in the moment at any one time, and kind of avoiding this desire to decide that there's one right way or there's one overarching truth. In chaos magic, there's really this belief that it's okay to select what works for a moment in time, to select what works for a particular spell or working that you're doing, and to think about what each particular paradigm or each particular idea actually brings to the table, and how you are entitled to take from all of them. You'll notice that at certain times certain things have worked, and at other times they haven't worked so well and something else has worked. And actually this just kind of means that for different circumstances and in different situations, different ideas can give more or less to the equation. So this is what the avoidance of dogmatism is about too. And it's also about, I think, respecting the individual journey of each chaot or each magical sorcerer or sorceress. It's about realising that we're all learning different things at different times, and actually we can really appreciate each other's journeys to that end, and we can kind of learn from each other's mistakes, and that makes our own progress go smoother. If we can really have that dialogue and we can really come from an objective, non-dogmatic place, we can find out what's been working for other people, and that's really the excitement of it. And that was really the excitement of the repeal of the witchcraft law, just this idea that we could get together and we could really talk about what had worked, and we didn't have to find some kind of like shady backstreet occult bookshop to do it. We could do it in broad daylight, we could do it on the internet. And that's the really exciting thing as well. But it only really works for you if you agree with yourself before you begin to avoid dogmatism in your particular practice, so that you can keep your ears open, your eyes open, your third eye open, your mind open to different possibilities, and appreciate that other people have had a different journey to you, and kind of think about what that journey has been like for them, and appreciate any any advice posited. Sorry, I think I'm going to take some water now. Love to talk. What can I say? Personal experience, and the idea that prizing personal experience over and above anything that you read, that's the second key principle of chaos magic. It's very important not to become an armchair theorist in your journeying, and it's also very important that you find out what works for yourself, and that you don't take somebody else's word for it, and you don't take something that you read as gospel. It's important to check things out for yourself, not only because then you'll know that it works for you, and you will appreciate the idea that some things work for some people and don't for other people, and this is very dependent upon your particular magical skill set that you have, or the particular culture you were raised in, or how far you can actually decondition your belief system, but I'll go into that. It's also very important to go via your own experience so that you can strengthen your skills, and so that you can hone your abilities. The more that you actually practice with something, the more you put something into play, the more you experiment with it and change it and play around with it and understand and fine-tune the variables of it, the greater magical being you'll become. So I think that's really all I need to say about personal experience, is just purely that it's very important to know what works for you, and not to believe that you need to honour these big thick books or honour this secret society and these orders, but actually to check in with yourself. Ask yourself if it's working for you. There's nothing wrong particularly with delving wholesale into a particular system or into a particular magical way of thinking. But you've always got to do it very much in tune with your perception of what's going on. What have the results been for you? What have you gleaned from it? And this is something that's important. This would be the second principle of chaos magic. The third principle is technical excellence. There's quite a big misconception, or there certainly used to be, amongst people in the magical or occult community, that chaos magicians or chaos witches, I prefer chaos witch, are sloppy in their work, or kind of haphazard, or kind of like hodgepodge with their work, because it's really all about finding your own way and experimenting and getting that paint box open and kind of finding what works for you, and mixing things together, or very swiftly shifting paradigms, deconstructing your last belief system and building it up into something else and then going there. So really, I guess we look like a load of ragtaggle journeyers with no particular kind of ambition or endpoint in mind, and I suppose it can look like it would lead to sloppy work. But actually, one of the key principles of chaos magic is to keep a very meticulous record of what you've tried, and keep a record of the variables that you've changed in your practice. And if you do the same spell twice, 3 times, 4 times, make a note of what the conditions were each time, maybe what the lunar phase was each time, if that's what matters to you, what kind of preparations you did for it, and that kind of thing. And I'll go into preparation later in the video. So really the third principle is about perfecting your practice, and understanding that even if you're trying to do the most far out thing ever, you can learn about your attempts each time, and you can build on the experience that you've had each time, so that it becomes easy to, it becomes easier and easier to say, for example, build an astral altar, or deconstruct an astral altar, or put a protection spell on someone, do a banishing ritual, create a servitor. Each time you do these things, you're actually building up your knowledge base of what works best for you and the different obstacles that you encounter. And so keeping a magical record book, which is what Phil Hine calls it, is actually a key principle of chaos magic, because it enables you to perfect each time, and to actually bring new things into the mix. So you know, if you're one of those witches that finds it difficult to actually write down what you did, and to kind of meticulously record what happened as a result of spellcraft, that kind of thing, you might find that there's actually a big hole missing in practice for you, because it's really helpful to be able to see your workings each time, so it is well worth doing. And I think that's why in a former video, I think it was called Creativity in the Craft or something, I actually posited the importance of making sure that your Book of Shadows is not just a place where you write something down from other books that you've read. It's not just a place where you write down things that you already know. It's not just a place where you kind of attractively decorate pages which are dedicated to each spoke on the turning year. You know, a magical record book is something that is scrappy, it's something that's lived in, it's something that's alive, and it's absolutely potent with your experiences and the challenges that you've had and how you manage to overcome them. So I think that's just something that's very important to note, is that you don't want a Book of Shadows or a magical record book, a Book of Mirrors, whatever you personally call it, your grimoire. You don't want it to be dead. You don't want it to be something that looks lovely for future generations, but actually in terms of your own practice, it's just useless. You want it to be alive. You want it to be like a really scrappy art journal or something. Not in terms of it being decorative, but in terms of it being not something that you're not precious about. That's very important in the chaos magic approach. I can't imagine what I look like gulping all this water, but I'm losing my voice, and I know exactly why I'm losing my voice. It's because I had to spray something on some wood a little while ago, and it's really irritating me. But I've gone this far, so I'm going to carry on, and if I lose my voice, then it's just a sign of how much I love you guys. I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to be dedicated to this video. Okay, the fourth principle of chaos magic is deconditioning or desensitizing, depending on what text you're reading. I am a huge proponent of Phil Hines' work, and he chose to refer to it as deconditioning, so that's what I'm going with. Deconditioning is the breaking down of the belief structures, the thoughts, the attitudes, and the outlook which has been kind of prescribed to you and absorbed into you by the society that you inhabit, the family that you were raised in, etc. It's obviously very important, if you're going to go into any esoteric dealings, dancing in the magical sphere, that kind of thing, that you pay attention to anything that is actually a part of your psyche which may be repressing or restraining you in that regard. It's important to be able to jump off the cliff and into the etheric majesty of the discoveries that you're going to make. And if certain parts of your personality or psyche or preconceived notions actually do battle with your desire to be the most potent magical being that you can be, then it's actually really somewhat of your spiritual duty to strip that stuff back, to dismantle it, to understand where it came from, how you acquired it, and then to ultimately release it and to let it go. My key interest in deconditioning is actually as a result of it kind of being twofold in a way. So deconditioning is obviously something that we do a lot in personal development, in healing. It's the purpose of shadow work, to be able to integrate all parts of the self, to be able to foist off this idea that we should have some shameful sub-personalities that can't see the light of day. Shadow work is about bringing everything together, and deconditioning is kind of in a way about that too. It's about stripping off the ideas of who you think you should be, and it's about actually removing the limitations of what your future self could be. So deconditioning is about looking at anything within you that is kind of contrary to the idea of being an empowered magical being and going on a really potent journey into the astral, into the majesty that fills the physical and all of that kind of thing. So it's important for you to understand what your own mental limitations are and why you have them, and then to get very clear on the fact that you are going to dismantle them, you are going to deprogram yourself and then reprogram yourself so that you can be the most potent magical entity that you can be. And so really there's that kind of twofold thing there, where it's about healing and it's about self-development and self-awareness, but it's also about heightening your spiritual ability, and that's what I really love about deconditioning. I wanted to make a point about deconditioning here. In chaos magic we have this this kind of principle that we call belief as a tool, which is where you actually adopt the position of being able to take on a set of beliefs in order to carry out a magical working. And so really it's about being fluid in the ego, ensuring that your ego is not hanging on so much to your core beliefs that you can't actually adopt a different guise, adopt a different set of beliefs in order to make something happen or to experiment with something. And I'm going to talk about belief as a tool in a different video, because it's not actually one of the 6 chaos magic principles, but it is something that is very widely used and believed in chaos magic. This idea that belief is fluid, that belief can empower us, and that we can actually wear wear the cloak of belief and actually fully commit to a certain belief and then shrug it off. And this is really about deconstructing the ego, which is something that Crowley was also very concerned with. And I would argue that potentially Crowley himself was somewhat of a forerunner for what became known as chaos magic in a way, because he really did develop his own world in a lot of ways. And whether or not you're really a fan of Crowley, or whether Crowley actually scares the shit out of you, I don't think it really matters. I think that in a sense, just Crowley's approach to life and to the idea of magic and what it meant was somewhat of a forerunner for chaos magic in this way. So basically, with deconditioning or the deconstruction of the ego, the point that I'm trying to get to is that there's actually no need to break down every single thing about yourself. You're actually, with deconditioning, I would argue, looking for those specific parts of your belief structure, the attitudes that you subscribe to, the things you've learned from the culture and the family you've been raised in, etc. You're looking for those specific things which actually block you from going the distance, from really learning about magic, from really kind of opening up your third eye and opening up your willingness to receive new information. If you're shutting yourself down, if your ego is not allowing you to actually explore, to keep an open mind, to watch the dots connect as you actually do this magic and these rituals. For example, if somewhere in your ego you're telling yourself that this is all bullshit and that really nothing will happen, that is a part of yourself that you can actually kind of home in on, identify, go towards it and work to dismantle it, because it's not going to help you with your magical journey. You need to have an open mind. When you're actually putting a spell together and deciding to do something very specific, you need to be open to any and all potential consequences of what you've done. And this is where you learn from, right? This is how you learn. This is how you absorb what works and what doesn't work. So if you have any little part of your ego which is already decided beyond all reasonable doubt that it's not going to work, then that is an area that you could definitely use deconditioning to kind of dismantle and get right with. And deconditioning is an ongoing process. Obviously, a lot of your preconceptions and a lot of the thoughts and attitudes you have that might be holding you down in some way on the spiritual level will come from your childhood, your formative years, and the culture that you were raised in. But you'll also find as you move on into adulthood that you'll have certain experiences which will make you feel jaded and cynical or skeptical, or you might have certain experiences with magical communities that kind of turn you off to the idea, or any number of things could happen that will potentially shut you down and make you feel kind of unable to move forward. So it's very important to continue this process of deconditioning and to understand that every so often you do kind of acquire a new layer of psychic muck that you kind of need to deal with in order to continue to make strides as a magical practitioner. So that's very important to note. The fifth principle, diverse approaches. This is something that I think I've kind of already made you guys aware of and helped you guys to understand from the little that I have discussed chaos magic on the channel. But basically, chaos magic works on the principle that it's okay to find what works. So if you haven't seen my video about magical models and possibilities, I'll link it below. I recommend that you go to that video and actually absorb what I'm saying about the 4 key magical models and the 5th model, which is the meta model, which actually gives us the permission to recognize where the good is and where the productivity is and where the benefits are in each of these 4 models, and then decide to subscribe temporarily to what works for that point in time. That's part of what it means to have a diverse approach. The other thing is obviously to be open to trying new things, not to get stuck in one way of thinking. One of the key things about chaos magic is that it's a total remedy to any idea of venerating one tradition or holding fast to one tradition. Chaos magic is really about tasting everything from the cornucopia, really going where you find majesty and inspiration. And that's an important thing. So diverse approaches would be the 5th principle. I don't think I need to say any more about that at this point, but I may well make another video in the future if I feel that it's important to kind of go on in that vein. The last principle of chaos magic is the principle of gnosis. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. I'm sure some of you already know that. But actually the way that we use gnosis in chaos magic, the way that we use the word, is to describe an altered state of consciousness. And I believe that the reason that gnosis is used for this is really because it's often in the altered states of consciousness that we find the deepest and most profound knowledge, the knowledge that we're after, the thing that we're really looking for, right? And in chaos magic, we have two distinct kinds of gnosis. We've kind of broken it down into two distinct levels of gnosis: inhibitory gnosis and excitatory gnosis, or inhibitory states and excitatory states. So these are the two ways of reaching an altered state, or reaching gnosis, as we would say in KO lexicon. Inhibitory states are achieved through doing things that are normally physically passive. So stuff like meditation and yoga and trance work and scrying, that kind of stuff. Excitatory states are normally reached by doing something physically active, so things like dancing, drumming, chanting, and even sexual arousal, that kind of stuff. So if you can kind of combine all of the different ways that you can think of altering your consciousness by actually altering your physical state in one way or another, and opening yourself up to the ability to move into an altered state, you can normally split the group of things that you've imagined down into an inhibitory state or an excitatory state. And with the use of things like entheogenic substances, I would argue that you can use those kinds of things to go to either an inhibitory or an excitatory state. So really it's about the way that you use that kind of thing and what you're doing. An ayahuasca journey, for example, would be inhibitory. But using things like stimulants and pathogens, etc., they would obviously be more excitatory. So really there's this whole big bunch of things that come under this umbrella, and really the idea of reaching an altered state of consciousness is something that is really kind of it's overstated. In fact, we move in and out of what would be considered to be non-consensual, meaning kind of like not part of consensus reality. We move in and out of those states all the time. So for example, we often go on autopilot, which is kind of doing something without cognitive function, kind of just doing it and having our mind be elsewhere. We daydream. This is an altered state of consciousness. The stage between sleeping and waking is an altered state of consciousness. So you have all of these different things that we actually do in a very ordinary, in a very commonplace way, but actually we're not really tuned into consensus reality at that time. But when we talk about creating a state of gnosis, what we're often talking about is really, really going there. So it's something that is completely intentional, it's something that we need to be completely open to, and it's something that we can really bring to the fore through the use of inhibitory and excitatory states. So these are the 6 principles of chaos magic, and I think it just gives you a starting point to help you understand the way the approach works. And hopefully I'll do a lot more videos on chaos magic in the future, and hopefully this has been useful and not too garbled. And I just about didn't lose my voice, which is good, but I think when I turn this video off I'm going to need to drink a pint of water and maybe open all the windows. It was a very ill-advised time to start filming a video, and I won't be making that mistake again. But when you got to treat wood, you got to treat wood. Do you know what I mean? That's just the way it is. So hopefully I managed to get the point across. And until next time, much love, blessed be. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. It's a chaos maxim, and do what you will with that.